Did you know the Fellowship got attacked by wargs before they got to Moria? And Gandalf showed off some serious wizard power during that fight. Plus, the real culprit behind the Watcher in the Water wasn't Merry or Pippin, but someone you might not expect. Today, we're discussing two scenes from the Fellowship of the Ring that Peter Jackson put his own spin on, and comparing them to Tolkien's chapter, A Journey in the Dark. So far, we have witnessed dozens of changes that have altered the plot, characters, and overarching themes of the Lord of the Rings saga, and today is no different, as there are about 15 changes that we're covering in these crucial scenes, including an epic moment from Gandalf, which was removed for reasons I can't figure out. My name is Gibby, and welcome to episode 12 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Lord of the Rings edition. This is the show where I become an ultra nerd and point out all the differences between the adaptation and the originals. This isn't hate on either the books or the movies, as both are awesome works of art that we can enjoy in different settings. But I do think that diving into the context and lore that Tolkien built around this epic story really helps maximize our enjoyment of the series. So join me today as we uncover these two scenes in the Fellowship of the Ring and compare them to Tolkien's chapter about the company's journey through Moria. As always, I'll be comparing these works through 4 different categories, which are characters, timeline, location, and plot. And of course, before we jump into the differences, we gotta review what happens in these scenes of the movie. So let's get started by picking up where we left off in last episode, which was right after Frodo decides to take the path through Moria, and Gandalf gives us an ominous stare down. We cut to the Fellowship journeying along a path that is set against the mountain as they are about to come upon the walls of Moria. Gandalf takes Frodo aside as they walk and asks him how his shoulder is doing and if he feels the ring's power growing. He warns that evil will be drawn to him from outside the Fellowship and perhaps from within as well. Of course, he is foreshadowing Boromir in this moment. He also warns that there are some powers in the world that he himself has not yet been tested against. Gimli then interrupts by pointing out the walls of Moria, and we cut to later in the day as the Fellowship has arrived at the spot where the door should be, and once it lights up, Gandalf reads the inscription. After reading the inscription, he believes that a password is meant to be spoken, but he can't seem to figure it out. He spends some time trying different spells while the others laze about, and Merry and Pippin toss some stones in the nearby pond. Eventually, Frodo figures out the riddle of the door and asks Gandalf what the word for friend is in Elvish. He speaks the word and the door opens. But as the Fellowship slowly journeys inside, they realize that skeletons fill the space and the dwarves who once inhabited this place are long dead. Before they can head back, however, a tentacle shoots out of the pond and grabs Frodo. The Fellowship jumps into action and they save Frodo from the Watcher in the Water, which is this kraken-looking thing, but at a great cost as it destroys the door to the mines and leaves the company trapped inside the mountain. The only way through now is along this treacherous path through Moria. The Fellowship journeys for quite some time, and we have a moment when Gandalf forgets which path to take. At this time, Frodo notices Gollum following them, and they talk briefly about the pity that Bilbo had on Gollum and how he spared his life many years ago. Suddenly, Gandalf remembers the way forward, and they continue, eventually reaching the tomb of Balin. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves there because this week we stop before they get into this guard room. Yes, I know you're probably yelling at your screen right now because this week we aren't covering the Goblin attack or the Balrog, as I'm saving that for next week's episode. But trust me, as I said in the beginning of this video, in just these two scenes, we already have over a dozen changes. So let's get into it by starting with a super easy category this week, which is characters. Why is it easy? Well, because there are no character changes. Since this part of the journey is just the Fellowship, we don't have any characters that Tolkien writes about who aren't included in the movie. Another simple category to cover is location. There really is only one discrepancy, which is the lake in front of the walls of Moria. In the book, Tolkien writes about how there is typically a stream which flowed in the valley of the mountain and led to the door Gandalf was searching for, but it had been dammed up and therefore the stream was gone and the water had filled the entire valley, creating a massive lake. In the movie, there is a brief glimpse of this body of water and it looks more like a pond. In fact, in the book, Tolkien writes about how it throws a wrench into their plans because now they have to walk all the way around the perimeter of the lake, which is a couple of miles. So I consider this a location change as Peter Jackson decided to make this body of water more of a pond instead of a massive lake. Lastly, before we get into the many plot changes, we need to address the only timeline difference between these scenes and this chapter. In the book, the Fellowship spends about 43 hours in the mountain, but in the movie, Gandalf says it's a 4-day journey to the other side. We also can reference Gandalf and Frodo's conversation about Gollum to get a feeling for time, as Gandalf notes that Gollum has been following them for 3 days, and I'm assuming he hasn't been following them on the Pass of Caradhras because I don't know how he would survive up there. So if Gollum had been following them since they got into the mines, they've been in there for 3 days already once they reach this fork in the road. Alright, so now that we've covered characters, location, and timeline changes, it's time to get into the all-important plot differences. But before we do, I just want to remind you that you can use my Audible link in the description to claim a free trial, which means that completely for free you can start listening to The Fellowship of the Ring or any other book you desire. It helps support the channel, and you get to follow along with me as I do this series, and you can enjoy the awesome narration of Andy Serkis at the same time. Anyway, back to the changes. To start, we need to address a portion of the story that Peter Jackson and his writers omit from their scenes. Before the company ever gets to the walls of Moria and the door to enter the mountain, they come down off of the Pass of Caradhras and camp out for a while to discuss how they should proceed. This is where something happens that I personally think is super cool, but you missed it if you haven't read the books. First, let's address the Fellowship's discussion. While camping out at the bottom of the mountains, Gandalf suggests taking the path through Moria. That's right, like we said last week, Gandalf is actually the one who wanted to go through Moria. He had been there before, as he mentions that he searched the mines for Thrain, who had been lost after Smaug took Erebor. He says that this was originally his plan for their path, but Aragorn was the one who shot down the idea, as he once had traveled through the mines as well and was not fond of the place. Gimli, of course, is in favor of this idea to go through Moria, as he would love to solve the mystery of what happened to Balin. After all, the whole reason Glóin and the dwarves went to Rivendell seeking the Council of Elrond was because of the lost company of dwarves in Moria. If you missed that part because you've only watched the movies and haven't read the books, then check out my previous episode on the Council of Elrond to learn all about Glóin and the reason for going to Rivendell. We'll get to this in just a moment, but this plays a role in Gimli's overall personality for this trip, because the movie portrays him as believing that Balin and the other company of dwarves are waiting with Maltbeer to welcome them into the mines. In the book, however, he knows that this isn't the case. Boromir is staunchly opposed to the idea and wishes to take the Gap of Rohan. And the hobbits are scared of Moria, as even in their own limited lore, they say that the name of Moria is black. After some time of back and forth, Aragorn agrees to support Gandalf, as his plan to take the Pass of Caradhras has already failed and it's time to give Gandalf a turn. Boromir suggests that the Ring-Bearer should have a say, which seems to be his way of getting out of a hairy situation, kinda like how you go to your parents and say your younger sibling is the one who asked for ice cream. Frodo suggests that they sleep on it and decide in the morning during the warmth of the day. But after they all agree to this, something unexpected happens. They realize that the wind howling around them isn't wind at all, but the sound of warg howls, and they can see shining eyes of wolves surrounding them. Of course, wargs are the giant hounds of Sauron, about 4 times larger than a wolf and a lot scarier looking. Pippin, scared by the sound of the oncoming wargs, says he should have stayed in Rivendell, but Sam comforts him by saying that he's scared too, but whatever may be in store for old Gandalf, I'll wager it isn't a wolf's belly. And Sam couldn't be more right, as we witness an epic moment of Gandalf unleashing his power to defeat the warg pack. But before this happens, they move to the top of a hill for better protection, and they are attacked twice in the night. First, Legolas kills one of the leaders, and the wargs back off, leaving the Fellowship to take turns being on guard while the others sleep. As the night goes on, the howls grow louder and more frequent, and finally near the morning, the wargs attack again. During the second attack, Tolkien describes Gandalf as growing in size while chanting loudly, and fire shoots from treetop to treetop and then essentially smites each one of the wolves. It's one of the few moments when you realize how overpowered Gandalf really is, as although Legolas does shoot a couple of the wolves, Gandalf really is the one who wipes all of them out. But as the light of the day approaches, they search the hillside and find no dead wargs, only Legolas's arrows scattered on the hillside. On this note, the Fellowship realize that they are now forced to take the path through Moria, as they can't wait around any longer. Gandalf says that the door isn't too far away, and they begin in haste towards the mountain. And this is where we can pick up the scenes from the movie. To start, let's talk about this brief conversation that Gandalf and Frodo have right before they reach the walls of Moria. This conversation does not happen in the book. Gandalf does not ask him about the ring or warn him of evil from within the Fellowship, although this seems to be the way that Peter Jackson decided to represent some of Frodo's thoughts from the book. We learn in the book that Frodo feels the weight of the ring growing and fear and evil inside him that he senses ahead and behind behind. Next, we have the lake in front of the door to Moria. As mentioned in the location category, this changed the course of the Fellowship, as Tolkien makes it clear that they now have to walk all the way around this body of water. Originally, there would have been a straight path to the door that followed a stream in the valley. The next change is actually in regards to Bill the Pony. In the movie, the release of Bill the Pony is a small moment, and Sam looks slightly dejected while letting him go free. But in the book, it is a much larger moment, and Sam dwells on it for quite some time, continuously bringing up poor old Bill and what will happen to him in the wild. Sam cries for most of the time and says he won't let Bill go, as it would be murder to just let him loose while wargs are hunting for them. And although this is true, Gandalf says it is better for him out in the wild than in the mines of Moria. It's actually only because of the attack by the Watcher in the water that Sam lets Bill go, as in that moment Sam has to choose between saving Frodo from the tentacle or holding on to Bill. Again, this is something he cries over for quite a while after the incident. Following this, we have the moment of Gandalf trying to solve the riddle of the door. A small line change is that Gimli is the one who explains the door riddle to Merry, who asks what the inscription means. He says that is plain enough. If you are a friend, speak the password and the doors will open and you can enter. Gandalf is the one who says this in the movie. Another line shift is that in the movie, they have Frodo be the one to recognize the simplicity of the riddle and solve it. In the book, it is actually Merry who realizes this, and Gandalf credits him with helping open the door. Peter Jackson has discussed this point before, and it is one of the many times in the entire trilogy that moments with the hobbits get shuffled around to better fit their personal character arc. Frodo's thievery of Farmer Maggot's crop gets pinned on Merry and Pippin, because they are meant to be the screw-ups. But the wise moments, like Merry helping to solve the door riddle, get moved to Frodo, because he is the main protagonist and needs to be the hero. And this segues perfectly into the next change, which is about who was throwing rocks in the lake, ultimately causing the Watcher to attack them. The film, of course, gives this to Merry and Pippin, our resident goofballs. But in the book, Boromir is the one who throws the rock in the water because he is frustrated with Gandalf. He's upset already that they're going through Moria, but gets more upset when Gandalf doesn't know how to enter the door. He even questions Gandalf about the legitimacy of his story about going through Moria before. He asks how Gandalf doesn't know how to get in if he's been through in the past, and Gandalf replies that last time he came out this way, but he's never had to go in this way. It's during this frustration that Boromir picks up a rock and chucks it into the water. And speaking of the Watcher in the water, let's cover that quick moment. As for the actual attack, it's quite brief. Frodo gets grabbed once and Sam slashes the tentacle off. Afterwards, 20 more tentacles come out of the lake, but the Fellowship runs into the mountain and the Watcher tears down the door, blocking their exit. Frodo does not get grabbed again like in the movie, causing the whole company to spring to his aid. I think they slightly extended this brief perilous moment because they omitted the attack with the wargs, so they needed to extend a fight scene. After this, Gandalf is asked what the creature was, and he says that he does not know and that there are older and fouler things in the world than just orcs. This line is used in the film, but it is to foreshadow the Balrog. Although Gandalf is familiar with the Balrog of Moria, it doesn't seem like he is too worried about it at this point in the book. As they enter the mountain, movie Gimli is bragging about the warm welcome they will receive, but they quickly find dead bodies and he freaks out. Again, to reiterate my point from earlier, this never happens. First, Gimli never at any point in the book brags about a warm welcome that Balin will give them. He knows that it's been ages since they heard from Balin and the dwarves who went to retake Moria. Honestly, I think he's expecting not so great things to be awaiting them in the mines. Second, they don't actually realize that the dwarves are dead until much later in the journey through Moria. Even a couple days in, Gandalf mentions that it's possible they could run into Balin. This is because the mountain is so massive that it's possible Balin could only have reclaimed part of the city and not the entire mountain yet. It's only when they reach the tomb of Balin that they realize what has happened there. Next, there are a couple of changes in regards to Gollum's inclusion in these scenes. First, Frodo in the book notes that he can hear extra footsteps besides those of the company. He isn't sure exactly what they are, but he feels the evil of the ring behind him, and this is Gollum whether he knows it or not. It is never outright stated that it is Gollum at this point in the book. Second, in the movie, Gandalf and Frodo have a conversation about Gollum and the pity that Bilbo had on him. Frodo even says that he wishes Bilbo would have killed him when he had the chance. This doesn't happen at this point in the story, because this conversation already took place way back in the Shire. When Gandalf returns to the Shire and confirms that the ring is the One Ring of Sauron with Frodo, they have a brief conversation in the movie. But in the book, this is a very long conversation that takes up a whole chapter. And a part of this conversation is Gandalf talking about the history of Gollum and Bilbo. Frodo at that moment in the Shire says that Bilbo should have killed him while he had the chance, and Gandalf gives the whole spiel of pity and dealing out death and judgment. There are actually multiple points like this in the entire trilogy trilogy that quotes from the chapter are moved to, because if Peter Jackson included that whole conversation from the first couple chapters of the book, we would have been there an hour just in the Shire. These quotes are essential to the story though, so Jackson and his writers just reuse this dialogue at different points throughout their own trilogy. So now we come to the final change of these scenes, which is when Gandalf is deciding on which path to take. They actually camp out in a guard room that is next to the fork in their path. They sleep there for multiple hours while Gandalf thinks about his decision, and a famous moment happens right here. In the movie, Pippin accidentally knocks a skeleton into a well once they reach the tomb of Balin, and we get the famous full of a Took quote. But actually, this moment happens during this chapter of the book while they're in this guard room. There is a well in the room, and Pippin, showing his age not for the first or last time in the series, takes a rock and lets his impulsive thoughts win by throwing the rock into the well. It is only satisfying for a moment, however, as when Gandalf finds out what happens, he chastises the young hobbit for his stupidity. We also begin to hear the sound of goblin drums after he throws the rock in, although it is faint and the Fellowship doesn't know exactly what it is yet. But they'll soon find out in the Tomb of Balin, which we're going to cover next week. These changes aren't life-altering and they don't majorly impact the result of the film, but it's another week of revealing the many necessary and unnecessary ways that Jackson and his writers changed Tolkien's work. Again, I have no hate toward the films, and I enjoy them quite a bit, but I love to reread these chapters with you guys and cover what really happened. I think the most major change from this section is the warg attack, as we miss an awesome moment with Gandalf. Obviously, he has a cool fight with the Balrog that we'll cover next week, but I would have loved to see Gandalf double in size and shoot fire from the sky at some wargs. Comment below what changes you think were right for Jackson to make and which ones you disagree with. As always, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and be sure to go to the series playlist in the description to catch up on all the episodes you've missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.